Grand Amplitude Thorough Season 2, Episode 3. The space between the stars and the iron Celts, the autumn campus. The transition from summer to senior year happened with the brutal, sudden drop of an autumn chill. The leaves across the university quad of Cadlonia College turned the color of bruised iron and burnt orange, drifting across the brick pathways. Gideon Rivers returned to campus fundamentally changed. The summer on the sun-baked highways of the Midwest had stripped away whatever residual softness he possessed. Now a senior, he walked across the quad carrying his rucksack, moving with the heavy, undeniable gravity of a nationally ranked wrestler. His jaw was set, his eyes focused straight ahead. He had spent 3 months anchoring his soul in the Macnite endurance. Vincit qui pater. He had built a new beginning, yet still he remembered the bolt, and then he saw her. Maya Eden was walking out of the campus library, clutching a stack of literature texts to her chest. She wore a heavy wool sweater, her hair catching the pale autumn sunlight. The moment Gideon saw her, the majestic incandescent beauty of her face violently struck like lightning once more. Every instinct, every drop of the supernatural twin flame recognition screamed at him to drop his bag, cross the quad, and pull her into his arms. But the philosopher king froze. The logic of self-preservation kicked in like a blast of freezing water. He remembered the absolute, world-ending agony of the first cut. She ran, a voice whispered in the dark corners of his mind. She sought shelter with the jester. If you let her in again and she runs a second time, you will not survive it. Fear, cold, ancient, and paralyzing, poured into the foundation of his body. Gideon locked his jaw, turning his face into an unreadable, unyielding mask of stone. He kept walking. Maya stopped at the bottom of the library steps, her breath catching in her throat. There he was. The angel hidden in the grit. She had spent her entire summer waiting. She had stared at her phone for 3 months, drafting apologies, drafting confessions. But every time she called, the line was dead. The number had been disconnected. Gideon had vanished into the Midwest, and in the silence, Maya had drawn the only logical conclusion a heartbroken lover could draw. He let me go. I broke it, and he finally walked away. Now, watching him approach on the brick path, she felt a desperate surge of hope. She took a half step forward, her lips parting to say his name. But then she saw his eyes. Gideon wasn't looking at her with anger. He wasn't glaring. It was far, far worse. He was looking at her with the absolute, polite distance of a stranger. The massive, immovable warmth of the back 40 was completely gone, replaced by a perfect stranger. Maya's heart plummeted into her stomach. The assumption she had carried all summer solidified into a crushing, undeniable fact. He's gone, she thought, the realization burning behind her eyes. He lost his phone, and he didn't even care enough to find me. He's moved on. They converged at the center of the quad, beneath the sprawling branches of an old oak tree. The distance between them shrank to 3 feet. The air between them hummed with a supernatural, suffocating electricity. Maya, Gideon said. His voice was a deep, spiritual tone, completely devoid of inflection. He gave a single, polite nod. He was using every ounce of his massive physical strength just to keep his hands at his sides, thinking that if he reached out, he would shatter. Maya's throat tightened so violently she could barely speak. She looked into the dark eyes that had once called her a queen, searching desperately for a single crack in the crystal. But Gideon gave her nothing. He was protecting his wound. "Gideon," she whispered, forcing a tight, fragile smile to hide the absolute devastation welling up in her chest. "Welcome back for senior year. Have a good semester," he replied quietly. He didn't stop walking. He didn't look back. Maya stood frozen on the brick pathway, clutching her books to her chest as the autumn wind whipped around her. She watched the broad, heavy shoulders of the philosopher king disappear into the crowd of students. She didn't call after him. She believed she had lost the right to. They were star-crossed. 2 souls passing in the daylight, completely blinded by the fear of the first cut and the tragic silence of a lost summer. Maya turned and walked in the opposite direction, neither of them realizing that the brief, polite exchange under the oak tree had just hid the longing of the intense, eternal, and roaring flame they both still carried deep inside their souls. The expanding universe and a new mentor. Gideon carried the heavy, agonizing weight of his decisions straight into the humanities building. He wasn't heading to Elias Thorne's grand, cavernous amphitheater. This senior semester, Gideon was enrolled in modern existentialism, and the contrast in the environment was immediate and jarring. Gideon ducked through the doorway of a small, intimate seminar room. There were no tiered seats looking down at a central podium. Instead, exactly 30 wooden desks were arranged in a perfect, egalitarian circle. Everyone was exactly at eye level. Sitting casually on the edge of one of the desks was Morris Callaway. Callaway was the absolute, breathing antithesis of Elia's Thorne. Where Thorne had been a towering monument of cold, austere intellect, Callaway was a rumpled, ex-Jesuit priest with warm, hangdog blue eyes and an endlessly forgiving smile. He didn't wear a tailored tweed suit. He wore a casual cardigan. And in blatant defiance of every known fire code and university administration policy, Callaway was actively puffing on an enormous, smoldering Super Churchill cigar. The room smelled faintly of rich tobacco and old books. No one complained. Callaway had a standing rule. If the smoke bothered anyone, they only had to ask, and he would extinguish it immediately. But no one ever asked. Just as Gideon took a seat in the circle, the door flew open. A breathless student stumbled in, dropping his bag and looking terrified of being reprimanded for his tardiness. Callaway didn't scowl or point to the clock. He simply took the Super Churchill from his mouth, his blue eyes crinkling with genuine delight. "Ah," Callaway said smoothly, gesturing with the glowing tip of the cigar. "Our universe is expanding. Grab a seat, son. We were just getting to the good part." Callaway didn't lecture, he mesmerized. His extemporaneous soliloquies were so profoundly spellbinding that the students completely forgot they were sitting in a classroom. He immediately referred to Gideon as Big Irish, in a warm, personal way. "Existence precedes essence," Callaway said, his voice dropping into a rich, knowing cadence as he paced the interior of the desk circle. "That is the bedrock of Jean-Paul Sartre. A hammer is built with a purpose, an essence, before it ever exists. But you are not a tool, you show up first. You exist, blank and terrified, and then you must define your essence through your actions." Callaway took a slow drag of his cigar. Heidegger called it Juerfenheit, thrownness. It is the terrifying reality that you were hurled into this universe without your consent. You didn't ask to be born. You didn't pick your parents, or the farm you grew up on, or the devastating heartbreak that fractured your soul. You were simply thrown into it. Callaway stopped speaking. He looked directly at Gideon, who was sitting perfectly still, the memory of Maya passing him on the brick quad playing on an agonizing, silent loop in his mind. "But you cannot use your thrownness as an excuse to hide," Callaway stated, the warmth in his voice hardening into absolute conviction. "Because you exist, your singular purpose in this brief, chaotic life is to become who you are. You cannot do that through avoidance. You cannot do that by building a fortress of polite silence. You must make a vigorous, unapologetic affirmation of yourself. If you love, you must love out loud. If you fight, you must fight in the light. Anything else is a betrayal of your essence." Sitting at his desk, Gideon felt his heart skip a beat. Callaway had just effortlessly dismantled his entire summer of endurance. Standing silent on the quad wasn't a victory, it was an existential surrender. Callaway exhaled a thick plume of gray smoke toward the ceiling and looked directly across the circle. "Isn't that right? Big Irish." Gideon looked up, his dark eyes meeting Callaway's warm, hangdog gaze. The ex-Jesuit offered a knowing, incredibly direct smile. "I heard the school opened the advanced ticket sales box office for the wrestling season this morning. The tickets sold out in exactly 4 minutes. The whole campus wants to cram into the bleachers to watch you tear people apart." "I want the spectacle." Callaway leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk in front of Gideon. "But when you step onto that mat, Big Irish, or when you walk across this campus, what version of yourself are you creating? Are you building a man who endures the world, or a man who is brave enough to actually live in it?" Gideon looked at the ex-priest. He found Callaway's radical, unapologetic warmth incredibly refreshing. He was the perfect mentor for this exact juncture of Gideon's life. "I'm still figuring that out, Professor," Gideon answered quietly. "Good," Callaway beamed, tapping the ash of his Churchill into a coffee mug. "Certainty is the enemy of faith, my friend." Part 3, the drop Gideon carried that heavy philosophical realization straight into the suffocating heat of the university wrestling room. Coach Gable McIntyre was standing by the scales in his gray sweatpants, holding a clipboard. He watched Gideon strip down to his shorts and step onto the metal platform. The slider clacked into place. 210, Gable rumbled, making a note. He looked up at his senior captain. The summer on the Midwest highways had burned away every ounce of residual softness. Gideon was entirely composed of dense, unyielding muscle and perfectly honed leverage. "We're making a shift," Gable announced, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a field general. You spent your earlier seasons relying on pure back 40 torque, but your technique is razor-sharp now. I am not sending you into the absolute heavyweight division to wrestle sloppy, 280-pound brawlers. You are dropping to the 197-pound weight class. Gideon stepped off the scale, wiping sweat from his forehead. You're pulling me away from Cila's lock. I am securing points for the Cadlonia Celts, Gable corrected sharply. Locke is naturally massive. He's an apex predator at heavyweight. We slide you under his radar to 197, you clear the division, and you bring home a national title. The strategy is set. Gideon nodded, accepting the tactical wisdom of the legendary coach. But destiny cares very little for human strategy. 300 miles away, the rumor of Gideon's weight cut hit the athletic wires. Cila's Locke, the two-time defending heavyweight champion, walked into his own coach's office. Cila's didn't want a third easy title. He wanted the farm boy who wrestled to survive his own mind. Cila's Locke locked his jaw and immediately began the brutal, agonizing process of starving himself down to 197 pounds. The apex predator was following his prey into the deep water, and so began the winter of the Cadlonia Celts. A senior season forged in blood, sweat, and cigar smoke. The aggressive slap of wrestling shoes hitting the mat, followed by the deafening roar of a sold-out college gymnasium. The tickets were gone before the ink on them dried. 3,000 screaming fans packed the bleachers every Friday night, the green and silver banners of Cadlonia College shaking from the noise. They came to see the philosopher king. Gideon could hear Morris Callaway's voice, echoing slightly as if spoken in a dream. Become who you are. On the mat, Gideon was no longer just relying on his endurance. The summer crucible had worked. He moved with a terrifying, technical fluidity. He was violently affirming his existence. Snapdowns, arm drags, flawless double-leg takedowns. Men who had wrestled their entire lives found themselves staring at the gymnasium ceiling, utterly dismantled by a farm boy reading existentialism. Gideon Rivers was now a machine. 10-0, 15-0, 20-0. He tore through the 197-pound division like a scythe through dry wheat. But he wasn't alone. Cila's Locke was mirroring him, a shadow matching him step for step. Locke had made the cut, moving with the hungry, desperate speed of a starved wolf. Every time Gideon pinned a man in the first period, Locke pinned his opponent 30 seconds faster. They were on a collision course, two unstoppable objects roaring toward the national tournament that would be held on Cadlonia's home floor. But amidst the roaring crowds and the undefeated streaks, there was a silence. Every time Gideon walked out of the tunnel, his dark eyes scanned the top rows of the bleachers, looking for her. Looking for the runner. But Maya Eden was never there. She was living in the silence of the throne-ness, believing the door was permanently closed. The tragedy of the twin flame isn't just the fire. It's the cold reality of the space between the stars when both people are too afraid to reach out. Gideon Rivers was becoming something more. But he was on a collision course with Enforce speeding directly at him with bad intentions. His journey was filled with allies and adversaries, and Locke was not a Baxter Pierce sheep in wolf's clothing. He was a hungry wolf. Grand Amplitude Thorough, end of episode 3, season 2. Stay ready for the showdown. It's epic.